What is up, everybody? Alex from ANAK here, and in today's video, I want to give you a crash course to make your podcasts easy to record and sound great. I'm going to walk through some ideas for gear, for setup, for software you might need, and just anything to get your podcast started and sounding great. So if you know anything about podcasting or video work or audio work, you know that money just you can spend a lot of it. It's not really about how much can you spend and the best setups you can get. It's kind of how do you get started? What is the bare basics that you need? You can get started with basically nothing and just the phone that you have, but it's not going to sound quite as good as putting even $100 into buying a USB microphone. That being said, you can go up from there exponentially and end up putting thousands of dollars into microphones, interfaces, softwares, preamp, everything. But we're not going to go into anything crazy today. We're just going to look at the basics to give you an idea of where you need to put money into and where you don't need to actually put money in to get started. So the things that you need to think about when starting your podcast is first, your microphone. How are you going to capture that audio? Next is your recording and editing software. What softwares are you using to capture the audio? And then what softwares are you going to use to edit the audio? Next is your recording environment. What is the setup that you're going to do to record? And do you need video or is it just an audio podcast so you can make some different adjustments? And lastly, I'm going to talk about just the basic key points of recording to make sure that your podcast is sounding good. First thing we're going to talk about is the mics, the money that you have in your minimal budget. This is where you're going to want to spend it. The microphone is the one thing that's going to drastically improve your quality, and especially when you're trying to spend little to no money, the little money that you do spend, I think should be put into microphones. Obviously, you can start out with just using your iPhone and just using the microphones on it, or even your headphones. A lot of people will do that. If you have a gaming headset, maybe you can use the microphone on that, but I would suggest upgrading and getting even just a simple USB microphone and record using softwares on your laptop. USB microphones like the ARTC1 or the Audio-Technica 2020 USB microphone or the Blue Yeti Nano microphone are great budget-conscious microphones. The Blue Yeti Nano is only about $150 Canadian at its peak when it's not on sale. So it's not very much in the grand scheme of gear that you could buy, but it is something that will dramatically improve the quality of your podcast for a relatively small price tag. I do have a video which I'll link up here. If there are two of you with two USB microphones, the same or different USB microphones, you can attach them to the same computer to record. Now, one more thing to think about when you're picking your microphone is the stand. How are you going to hold this microphone? We're going to talk more about the recording setup in a moment, but what you're going to have to think about from the microphone perspective is how can you have it close to your face, near you, but not actually hold it? Because if you're holding a microphone, it is going to pick up that noise. So ideally, you have it on a stand and it is separate from you so that you can talk freely with your hands and it will not affect the microphone position or it moving around at all. Now, a lot of USB microphones like the Blue Yeti Nano will come with little microphone stands that are perfect for putting on a desk or on a table in front of you. That will work great if that's what your setup's going to be. However, if that isn't your setup, you're going to want to look at bigger microphone stands or boom arms to be able to hold the microphones and be able to move them around as you need for your podcast setup. The next thing you're going to have to think about besides your microphone is what are you going to record with? If you're just using something like your phone and the microphone built into your phone or your headphones, you can even use something as simple as voice notes. You can get GarageBand on your iPhone if you have an iPhone. Anything that records sound will do the trick to record that audio. If you have a USB microphone, you're going to need a software on your computer. If you're on a Mac, GarageBand will work perfectly. If you're on a PC or a Mac, you can also use Audacity, which is a great free program too. And then the limits are basically endless. You can use anything from Pro Tools, Logic, or if you are an Adobe Cloud subscriber, you can use Adobe Audition or even Adobe Premiere Pro if that's what you have. After you've recorded, you're going to have to edit your podcast. If you're using software on your laptop, you're already in your editing software. You can use GarageBand or any of the softwares I just talked about for recording to edit your podcast as well. If you recorded on your iPhone, there are many apps that will allow you to then edit your podcast, but if you recorded in something like voice notes, you're going to need to transfer that file onto your computer for a program like Audacity or GarageBand. Now, the next thing you're going to have to think about is your recording location. Where are you going to record? Now, this is where gear really helps with the scenario that you're in. If you're just using a phone microphone or your laptop microphone, you're going to have to be very careful with the actual setup because those microphones are very sensitive and you can't really get that close to them without them distorting and sounding really weird. So they're going to pick up a lot of room noise. which means that you can't be in a very noisy environment. If you're using something like a USB microphone or an XLR microphone, you can typically get a lot closer to them and you can alter the gain, which we're going to talk about at the end of the video in the basic recording knowledge. But you can get a lot closer, which means it won't pick up as much of the room noise if you want to record comfortably on your couch in your living room that maybe isn't the most sound dampened room, but that's okay because you can get really close to your microphone and it won't pick up as much of the room. So when you're thinking about your setup, just make sure that you're not in somewhere that's too reverberant and also doesn't have a lot of background noise. Those microphones will pick up everything from your neighbor's dog running around after his toy to the sirens outside your apartment. That being said, I have recorded a podcast in a bar because the whole podcast was more of a discussion with friends in a bar about music. The link is in the description if you're interested. And finally, some basic recording tips to help you with whatever gear you're using to make your recording and editing process that much easier. The first tip that I have is that if you're recording with somebody and you're two different mics recording to two separate mediums of recording, whether that be a laptop or a camera, at the beginning, whenever you hit record, do a clap, just a simple. What that's going to do is it's going to give you a very clean sync point so that when you're editing, you can line up those tracks very, very easily. This is going to greatly reduce the echo and the phasiness and just the weirdness when two microphones almost aligned but not quite aligned. Now, if you're recording, for instance, with two USB microphones into the same software, it's not necessary if the recording software is actually recording it in sync for you. The next tip is talk into the front of the microphone. While this may seem obvious in the moment, sometimes a lot of people forget. If you've never used a microphone like a USB microphone and all you're used to is iPhones pick up everything. However, most microphones have what's called polar patterns, which means they have an area around the microphone that they'll pick up and an area around the microphone that they will reject. This helps reduce the room noise or the bleed of the other person in your microphone so that you have greater control after the fact. But what happens is if you record in the wrong side of the microphone, you just sound distant and far away. Just be sure to check that you are actually recording into the front of the microphone when you sit down to do your podcast. Next is making sure your microphone gain is correct. Basically what this means is making sure that the microphone sensitivity is set correctly for how close you are to the microphone and how loud you're speaking. This is a very easy thing to do, and with most USB microphones, they have a little gain knob on them or a piece of software where you can reduce the input gain. But it's very important to make sure that your audio is not clipping, but it is loud enough that you can actually hear it. Now, how can you tell this? In most recording softwares, they have little meters where you can see the input level of your microphone, and often they have input monitoring so you can hear back what you're actually recording. Listen to that and look at the meter and make sure that it's not too loud. You want it kind of in the middle of that meter or on the high end of the middle of that meter. Right in the sweet spot so that it's not too loud that it's clipping, but it's loud enough that you can hear it. What I would also advise is when you have your setup and when you're ready to go, do a little test. Record for a few seconds, 10, 15 seconds, and just talk like you would be talking. Maybe talk a little loud as you would get excited in your podcast, and then listen back and just make sure that it's nice and clean and crisp and not distorting. Now, along with talking into the front of the microphone and adjusting your input gain correctly so that you're not clipping, the best microphone technique and the best way to reduce bleed and room noise is to talk right onto the microphone, comfortably close to the microphone. The further back the microphone is from you, the more you're gonna have to turn up the input gain to get a nice signal, and that means the more room or bleed from a guest will come into your microphone. But that's it for this video, guys. I hope you got a nice overview and some ideas of what's possible and where you need to start with your podcast. If you have any more questions, leave a comment below. Also, be sure to check out in the description below. I have links to different softwares you can use, as well as different kits to get you started with podcasting, including microphones and mic stands that would be helpful to you, along with headphones and just other useful things for podcasting. So be sure to check those kits out in the description below. Please give this video a thumbs up if you found it helpful. It really does help. Subscribe if you haven't already. I will see you in the next video. Until then, always be creating.